Palace Thief, Section 3. In retrospect, however, perhaps my strategy was a mistake, for to convince a boy of his own stupidity is to shoot a poisonous arrow indeed. Perhaps Cedric Bell's life would have turned out more nobly if I had understood his motivations right away and treated him differently at the start. But such are the pointless speculations of a teacher. What was irrefutably true was that he was performing poorly on his quizzes, even if his behavior had improved somewhat, and therefore I called him to my office. In those days I lived in small quarters off the rear of the main hall, in what had been a slave's room when the grounds of St. Benedict's had been the estate of the philanthropist and horse breeder Cyrus Beck. Having been at school as long as I had, I no longer lived in the first form dormitory that stood behind my room, but supervised it, so that I saw most of the boys only in matters of urgency, and they came sheepishly before me. And with my bed folded into the wall, the room became my office. And shortly after supper one day that winter of his first form year, Cedric Bell knocked and entered. Immediately he began to inspect the premises, casting his eyes, which had the patrician set of his father's, from the desk to the shelves to the bed folded into the wall. Sit down, boy. You're not married, are you, sir? No, Sedgwick, I am not. However, we are here to talk about you. That's why you like putting us in togas, right? Frankly, I had never encountered a boy like him before, who, at the age of 13, would affront his schoolmaster without other boys in audience. He gazed at me flatly, his chin in his hand. Young man, I said, sensing his motivations with sudden clarity, we are concerned about your performance here, and I have made an appointment to see your father. In fact, I had made no appointment with Senator Bell, but at that moment I understood that I would have to. What would you like me to tell the senator? I said, and his gaze faltered. I am going to try harder, sir, from now on. Good, Sedgwick, good. Indeed, that week the boys reenacted the pivotal scenes from Julius Caesar, and Sedgwick read his lines quite passably, and contributed little that I could see to the occasional fits of giggle that circulated among the slower boys. And the next week I gave a quiz on the triumvirate of Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar, and he passed for the first time yet with the C+. Nonetheless, I had told him that I was going to speak with his father, and this is what I was determined to do. At the time, Senator Sedgwick Hiram Bell was appearing regularly in the newspapers and on the radio in his stand against Truman's plan for national health insurance, and I was loath to call upon such a well-known man concerning the behavior of his son. On the radio, his voice was a tobacco drawl that had won him populist appeal throughout West Virginia, although his policies alone would certainly not have done so. I was at the time in my late 20s, and although I was armed with scruples and an education, my hands trembled as I dialed his office. To my surprise, I was put through, and the center, and the drawl I recognized instantly, agreed to meet me one afternoon the following week. The man already enjoyed national stature, of course, and although any other father would no doubt have made the journey to St. Benedict's himself, I admit that the prospect of seeing the man in his own office intrigued me. Thus, I journeyed to the capital. St. Benedict's lies in the bucolic equine expanse of rural Virginia, nearer in spirit to the Carolinas than to Maryland, although the drive to Washington requires little more than an hour. The bus followed the misty serpentine course of the Potomac, then entered the marshlands that are now the false brick suburbs of Washington, and at last left me downtown in the capital, where I proceeded the rest of the way on foot. I arrived at the Senate office building as the sun moved low against the bare-limbed cherries among the grounds. I was frightened but determined, and I reminded myself that Sedgwick Hiram Bell was a senator, but also a father, and I was here on business that concerned his son. The office was as grand as a duke's. I had not waited long in the anteroom when the man himself appeared, feisty as a game hen, bursting through his side door and clapping me on the shoulder as he urged me before him into his office. Of course, I was a novice in the world of politics, and had not yet realized that such men are, above all, likable. He put me in a leather seat, offered me a cigar, which I refused, and then with real or contrived wonder, perhaps he did something like this with all of his visitors, He proceeded to show me an antique sidearm that had been sent to him that morning by a constituent that had once belonged, he said, to the coachman of Robert E. Lee. "You're a history buff," he said, "right?" "Yes, sir." "Then take it. It's yours." "No, sir, I couldn't." "Take the damn thing." "All right, I will." "Now what brings you to this dreary little office?" "Your son, sir." "What the devil has he done now?" "Very little, sir. We're concerned that he isn't learning the material." "What material is that?" "We're studying the Romans now, sir. We've left the Republic and entered the Empire." "Ah," he said, "be careful with that. By the way, it's still farce." "Your son seems not to be paying attention, sir." He again offered me the box of cigars across the desk and then bit off the end of his own. "Tell me," he said, puffing the thing until it flamed suddenly, "what's the good of what you're teaching them boys?" And this was a question for which I was well prepared, fortunately, having recently written a short piece in the St. Benedict's Crier answering the same challenge put forth there by an anonymous boy. "When they read of the reign of Augustus Caesar," I said without hesitation, "when they learn that his rule was bolstered by commerce, a postal system, and the arts, by the reformation of the Senate and by the writing of an inequitable system of taxation, when they see the effect of scientific progress through the census and the enviable network of Roman roads, how these advances led mankind away from the brutish rivalries of potentates into the 2 centuries of Pax Romana, then they understand the importance of character and high ideals." And he puffed at his cigarette. "Now that's a horse who can talk," he said. "And you're telling me my son Sedgwick has his head in the clouds." "It's my job, sir, to mold your son's character." He thought for a moment, idly fingering a match, and then his look turned stern. "I'm sorry, young man," he said slowly, "but you will not mold him. I will mold him. You will merely teach him." And that was the end of my interview, and I was politely shown the door. I was bewildered naturally, and found myself in the elevator before I could even take account of what had happened. Senator Bell was quite likable, as I've noted, but he had without doubt cut me, and as I made my way back to the bus station, the gun stowed deep in my briefcase, I considered what it must have been like to have been raised under such a tyrant, and my heart warmed somewhat towards young Sedgwick.